speaking about the Canadian import requirements that have just been added for plant-based products. And certainly I think over the last few days we've all relived sort of the big relevant changes that have driven us to this conversation today. But in many ways this story started with PED for us. Canada got PED about 8 or 9 months after the United States, and that first case was in central Canada in Ontario. And about a month after that case was announced, it was already decided that that had come in from an imported feed ingredient, that PED virus had been introduced to Canada through feed ingredients just by the way the case presented, and then that was published in October of 2014 already. And so for us, that really started creating a big sense of worry and panic as we started thinking about new ways to introduce diseases into North America. And then Scott's paper came out in 2017, and that absolutely terrified me because he showed us a model where in fact it very much could occur, and that motivated us to start thinking about a lot of other things. Then in August, when China broke with ASF, we started looking at our feed ingredients that we're purchasing from China, and really that motivated us to keep going. Then last fall, Scott published another paper on the shipping model. And then this latest paper from Megan certainly continued to terrify and keep me up at night. So we wanted to work through a system in Canada that wasn't just focused on the big stuff. We'd all talked about live animal import, we'd all talked about animal products and byproducts, international travelers and international waste as a risk factor for introduction of transboundary pathogen diseases. But we wanted to also think about feed and feed ingredients. And so why we were worried was certainly for all the obvious reasons. The potential for exposure to virus, whether it be on roads, in processing, in transport, woke us all up to the fact that this is very much a possibility, and the PED story started all of that for us. Last fall, we already published, just after Paul and Swine Health Information Centre put out their document on the risk of feed ingredients. The Canadian Pork Council, a colleague of mine just sitting down in front of me, Gabriella, worked on this information piece for pork producers to help them understand that we are importing risk into our Canadian herd, and that different feed ingredients are something that they need to start paying attention to. The Canadian pork sector then approached the Government of Canada and said, we need to get a handle on this. We are concerned about the absolute devastation that ASF would cause our sector. And so an industry working group was launched. And you'll see up on the right, that was the first risk analysis that we did with the CFIA Science Branch and with the Canadian Pork Council and other members of the community to put together our first risk-based analysis of what was happening, and really to focus on feed imports not of animal origin, so plant-based products. And so that analysis was finished, and that led then to this second step. And this is an ongoing process. The first report has just been published, and this is an establishment of a risk-based assessment for feed mills in Canada. And so they will have to participate in this program. CFIA inspectors will be going to the feed mills. They already do this activity, so this will expand their work, and they'll categorize the feed mills according to their level of risk. We did a literature review, and a scientific advisory committee came together to really form this part of the risk assessment, and we ended up dividing it into 13 factors into these 3 categories. And you can see the big categories up there right now. So inherent risk factors like the production volume, are they importing ingredients? So things like that were divided into the inherent categories. Do the mills have mitigation factors in place? Do they participate in a national biosecurity program? Are there control measures for incoming products and ingredients? And do they have full-time people on site that are responsible for feed safety assurance? That was the second category, and then the third category was really compliance factors and how they implement their compliance and mitigation factors was the third category we divided into. And so with those 2 things in place, the challenge for us was really, how do we deal with plant-based feed ingredients? They're not in any way in the Health of Animals Act in Canada. The Health of Animals Act deals with animals. No one had ever thought of putting plants into the Animal Act. And so animals, animal byproducts, animal products are all in that. So regulation wasn't possible. We would have to really go into the entire Health of Animals Act to make a change. And industry was really interested in rapid change to deal with this risk. We didn't want to wait for 4 years or 10 years. We wanted change immediately. And so policy change, though, was something that we could look at immediately instead of a regulatory change. So on March 19th of this year, secondary control zones were declared by the Minister of Agriculture in Canada under that Health of Animals Act. And so those secondary control zones made every international importing seaport in Canada a secondary control zone. We could also maybe use the term quarantine, but we use the term secondary control zone. And so these are Canada's 6 ports of entry for feed ingredients at this time. And each one of those has now become a secondary control zone. So those secondary control zones then were given this order on March 29th. So on March 29th, the Health of Animals Act created designated things as being capable of being affected or contaminated by African swine fever virus. And so in this circumstance, we were asking for these grains and oil seeds to be declared as designated things of risk to the Canadian pork sector for African swine fever. And so a notice to industry was immediately sent out, and that notice came very quickly, and the industry was, I think, the feed and nutrition industry was somewhat surprised at how quickly industry, the pork sector and government had got together to create this. But it put import requirements for unprocessed grains and oil seeds into this designated things. And why we picked grains and oil seeds is from those 2 risk analysis, from the work that Scott had done, from the work that Megan had done, from work that we had cooperated with on Kansas State. Kansas State helped us create that risk portfolio for Canada. We decided grains and oil seeds were the big, and associated meals were the big challenges. And so with those details, designated things cannot be taken into ports of entry, secondary control zones now without a permit. You can't import these high-risk products into Canada without applying for a permit before the shipping event occurs. The minister, the government of Canada, can reject any permit at any time if they feel the risk is too high. The permit holder has to keep records, and they have to keep those records within Canada. And those records have to go through where those products are coming from throughout the world, dates and so on and so forth. And so every week, we're updating that list of affected countries. And of course, now that South Korea has declared that they're ASF positive, South Korea will be added to the list. Any feed import from South Korea now will have to go through this permitting process. Again, records are required. If a designated thing is taken into that secondary control zone, then we've put some biosecurity measures in place. The container must be either a single-use bulk container, or the containers must be lined with single-use plastic with the goal of preventing cross-contamination. And so a critical detail within this. Again, other rules to prevent cross-contamination were put in place. We really wanted to take this through our risk analysis portfolio as best we could. And then we also took the work that was being done in the United States on time and temperature. And we also added the time and temperature factors into how we would treat these imported products. So designated things that were raw or unprocessed coming into the secondary control zones also are subject to heat treatment. And then these 20 days at 20 Celsius or 100 days at 10 Celsius, that's from advice we got from Kansas State last fall, and put those in place. And maybe those numbers are too long and maybe they're too short, but we're very happy with the fact that the research is evolving and these numbers are going to help protect us from potential virus introduction. Some further details on how products must be moved. So once they're in the secondary control zone, they can't go to multiple different locations. They can leave from there and go directly to their feed mill, but no wandering around the country. And then some more reinforcement on processing and the power of heat treatment. And so we've very much taken the work that has been done by everyone else who's sort of been up at the stage with me today. We've taken that work, we've appreciated their cooperation, and we've been able to put this policy into place. So far, we've had extremely positive industry response. The number of permits issued has actually been very low. I spoke with the CFIA this morning, and I think it's only 15 to date. So, what have we done? Well, we've possibly changed people's behavior. So because we've added a permitting system, people aren't necessarily introducing product like they used to. They're buying local. They're pulling their soybeans in from the United States or Canada instead of pulling organic soybean meal in from China or India. And so we've potentially had that positive impact. There's only 20 importers that were bringing product into Canada, and at the time we started this, only 3 were from China. So one of the real advantages we had is we could pick up the phone and phone each and every one of those importers and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. We really would love your cooperation to make sure that this gets done properly, and understand that we're protecting the Canadian, we're protecting the North American swine population. And so those importers were extremely cooperative. They understood the risk. They did not want to see the destruction of the North American pork sector. And so we had great compliance. The Animal Nutrition Association of Canada, their feedback has also been extremely positive on this. In the very early days, because the implementation came so fast, we had one issue to deal with, and after that, things have been very peaceful. So I'm really excited to present how positive this experience has been. It's very much worked for Canada. We were able to do this through policy instead of regulation. Because we only have 6 ports of entry, it was maybe much more achievable for us. But certainly the common goal of keeping ASF out of North America remains a core driver for me, and I think all of our speakers today share that. This is absolutely critical for us. So thank you very much.